They didn't scream, they didn't riot, they just left, one by one, house after house, street after street. Families packed their lives into boxes, walked out the front door, and never came back. The government told them their town was no longer safe, but what it didn't tell them was that it never was. This is the story of Times Beach, Missouri, a town that poisoned itself and then tried to disappear from history altogether. In the 1970s, Times Beach looked like any other small Midwestern town. Just outside St. Louis, nestled along the Merrimack River, it was the kind of place where neighbors waved, kids rode bikes, and weekends meant community barbecues. It wasn't rich, but it was proud. People worked hard. They didn't ask for much, but the town had one small problem: dust. The roads were mostly dirt, and when summer came around, a simple walk down the block meant a face full of grit. The town needed a cheap solution, and one man offered them one. His name was Russell Bliss, a local waste hauler with a can-do attitude and a big truck full of answers. In the early 70s, Bliss was hired by Times Beach officials to spray oil on the roads. It was a common dust control method. Pour a little used motor oil, settle the dirt. What they didn't know was that Bliss wasn't just spraying motor oil. He'd made a quiet deal with a nearby chemical company, Napaco. That company had been producing Agent Orange, and what they gave Bliss was waste laced with dioxin. Not just any toxin, one of the most poisonous compounds known to science. Dioxin is terrifying because it doesn't work fast. It works quietly, slowly, secretly. It builds in the fat of animals and humans. It lingers in the soil for decades, and even tiny doses, measured in parts per trillion, can destroy immune systems, cause birth defects, and spark cancer. At the time, almost no one outside of the chemical industry knew how dangerous it really was, but Bliss didn't care, and neither did the company. They just wanted the waste gone, so they paid Bliss to make it disappear. And he did, right onto the dirt roads of Times Beach. It didn't happen overnight. At first it was little things: kids breaking out in rashes after playing outside, dogs and cats getting sick, farm animals dying suddenly. Then people started falling ill: migraines, nausea, skin lesions. Local doctors were confused. State officials ignored the patterns. No one looked deeper. No one wanted to believe that the town itself, its soil, its streets was poisoned. But by the late 70s, something bigger was brewing, because Bliss wasn't just spraying in Times Beach. He'd been spraying other places too, and in one of them, dozens of horses dropped dead within weeks. That got the federal government's attention. In 1979, the Centers for Disease Control and Environmental Protection Agency started digging into the case. They tested the soil, they examined old spraying routes, and what they found was horrifying. Multiple towns across Missouri were contaminated, but Times Beach, that was the worst of them all. One soil sample from a local park contained 300 times the lethal threshold of dioxin exposure. Even the EPA couldn't look away anymore, but by then it was already too late. In 1982, a historic flood swept through Times Beach. The Merrimack River overflowed, washing through homes and roads, mixing toxic soil with the rising waters. When the flood receded, it left behind mud, debris, and more questions. The EPA returned and retested, and this time the results weren't just bad, they were catastrophic. The levels of dioxin found were so high that the only solution was drastic. In December 1982, the government announced a complete evacuation. The entire town, all 2,000 residents, were told they had to leave forever. Imagine being told your hometown no longer exists, that your house is worthless, that your neighborhood is now a hazard zone. That's what happened to the people of Times Beach. Some resisted, others begged for time, but eventually they left. The government paid families to relocate. Homes were abandoned, bulldozed, or burned. The streets were fenced off. Signs were removed. Zip codes were erased. By the end of 1985, Times Beach was no longer on the map. But that wasn't the end. For years after, the EPA worked to clean the site. They built a massive incinerator, burned thousands of tons of contaminated soil, declared it safe by the mid-1990s. Today the area is now Route 66 State Park. Families walk dogs, tourists take photos. Few realize they're walking on the ashes of a disaster, a town that trusted and got betrayed. You might ask, how did this happen? How could the government ignore warnings? Why was the town sprayed for so long? The truth is murky, just like the river that ran beside the town. Internal memos surfaced, warnings were issued, corporate ties between Napaco and the waste haulers were traced, but accountability, very little. Russell Bliss was never criminally charged for the spraying. The companies involved quietly paid settlements and faded from the headlines. Today, Times Beach is rarely mentioned in classrooms. You won't find its name in most history books. It was erased, not just physically, but mentally, a national amnesia. But the story of Times Beach isn't just about a chemical. It's about trust. It's about silence. It's about what happens when profits matter more than people. The people of Times Beach didn't get monuments. They got buyouts and bulldozers, but their story deserves to be remembered because it could happen again, and maybe it already is. You made it this far. Thank you. You now know the story that most people were never told. The next time you drive down a forgotten road, look closely. History might be buried right beneath your feet. This was the story of Times Beach, a town that trusted and paid the price.